Quite recently, the word weird has become the operative phrase of political discourse in America surrounding the 2024 presidential election, and I think that this moment actually is so instructive on several different levels for both the left and the right. Because even though the left has kind of drudged up this word to use it as a bludgeon against their conservative enemies, I think the way we've been talking about politics for a very, very long time in this country is actually part of the reason why this word has any power or staying force in the conversation in the first place. So in this video, we're going to explore the idiocy of the idea of political weirdness, and we're going to navigate how we got here. And I'm going to give you some tools on how to actively confront this menace and hopefully return our discourse to a more rigorous state. But before we do any of that, my friends, I hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watson. I am your host. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to help us increase the reach of our message. Even if you disagree with me, this is about saving our country and making people think in uncommon ways, using uncommon means that are uncommon to our age, but our founders knew them, and their intellectual forefathers knew them as well. That is my goal, and so I hope all of you join me. Thank you so much, and I hope all of you enjoy the video. So, Kamala Harris, ever since she ascended to the top echelons of the DNC and became the presumptive nominee, she has unfortunately brought down the level of political discourse already to a level that was worse than where it actually was. And she said one thing during an event in response to JD Vance that sparked an entire multi-day event of people in the media and people on social media calling conservatives weird. Watch.
And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird?
So this one thing where she refuses to address the substance of right-leaning arguments and instead goes straight for the character assault started this.
These guys are just weird. That's who they are.
As weird and creepy as JD Vance.
Super weird idea from JD Vance.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's quite weird. They're just plain weird.
Just plain weird.
Just plain weird.
That stuff is weird. They come across weird, and then they start being weird. Yeah, they're weird.
Being a really weird.
He's such a weirdo.
Donald Trump and his weirdo running mate are weird. Deeply and profoundly weird.
They are weird.
These Republicans just being weird, it's just weird. It's really weird.
Republican weirdness.
Now, the response to this sort of hive mind-like reaction from the left, from conservatives, has been to say either A, we're not weird, or B, you guys are weird. Some people have been fond to point out the various modes of personal expression that exist on the left, such as the idea of one being non-binary furries, some of the people that have inhabited the Biden administration who have been caught doing things that are rather just quite odd and strange to normal people, things of that sort. That's been the right's response. Or some people, like Ben Shapiro, have been saying, well, actually, JD Vance is not weird, and we're not the weird ones. You guys are the weird ones, and here's why we're not weird. Both of these responses actually fall into the trap that's being set for all of you who are the recipients of this slur. See, instead of actually denouncing the premise, i.e., denouncing the very idea that calling someone weird is even appropriate, or beyond that, is even intelligible in political conversation, you accept the premise and fight within the terms that have been set out with you. This is one of the reasons why I think the right is impaired in its ability to give its message to the public in this modern era, is because so often we accept the terms set out for us by our ideological adversaries without ever questioning the premise. But also, using the word weird in a political sense, it is actually not just a slur, it's also a diversionary tactic. It's a diversionary tactic set out by certain people to distract from the substance of matters actually being debated. Because there are two realms of political conversation. There's the personal realm, which I'll get to in a little bit in a moment here in a second. Then there's the policy realm. The policy realm deals with things like taxation, housing policy, military, foreign policy. These are things where you have to actually have a great deal of knowledge, or at least not a great deal of knowledge, but a little bit of knowledge to discuss things intelligibly. And if you were to endeavor in a conversation in this policy realm, and you clearly didn't know what you were talking about, there are empirical metrics I can then use, or other folks can use, to disqualify you or to embarrass you. But the character realm, the personal realm, now this is the realm of the subjective. This is the realm where character and taste and personal values override discussions of policy and other things that may be more important to the governance of a country. And this is the realm where over 90+% of political conversations actually happen. Now, I'm not necessarily saying this is a bad thing. The personal realm or the social realm is actually a very important part of how we as Americans understand ourselves in society. But if you are focused on the personal realm, when you're dealing with a policy issue, and you allow the personal realm to distract you from issues of policy, you will never be able to actually A, advance an agenda based on your policy proposals, or B, speak intelligibly about the truth of the matter. You will be distracted permanently by trying to defend your character. When political values or political questions become questions of character, you know you are in a society where politics has deteriorated from its proper standpoint, and it has become this all-encompassing force, which should not be so. Politics is merely the process of governing an institution meant to safeguard a society. But this kind of mode of engagement presupposes a mixture of politics and society that muddles concepts, confuses people, and keeps us in this kind of perpetual loop of antagonism, which induces factionalism amongst the people. A society divided is not a society that can actually understand what it has in common and therefore build for the future. So, weird, in this sense, reflects this deeper rot of the confusion of the political and society and this distraction of matters of substance for matters of taste. We need to be careful about this, my friends, because this single issue is enough not only to bring down, forget right-wing causes, forget conservative causes, it's enough to bring down anybody who is interested in an intelligible conversation about the future of our country. It is going to bring you into this sort of epistemic dungeon where you don't have the ability to see beyond your own shadow, a sort of Plato's cave situation. But another reason why I think this sort of weirdness, this weird conversation is especially pernicious, and I alluded to it in a moment ago, but I'm going to go more deep into this now, is because this is downstream of the second wave feminist maxim that the personal is political. So for those of you, I'm sure many of you do know, because much of my audience was probably around when the second wave feminist movement was actually becoming popular. But for those of you who do not know, the second wave feminist movement was the sort of deviation from the works of Susan B. Anthony and the original women's rights crusades of the early 1900s, late 1890s, early 1900s, and it went more into antagonizing the man. Because this entire, the calling call of second wave feminism, which was the personal is political, well, that was actually written in the context of saying that the life of the female in the home is actually public. It's not a private, because normally we view family as a private matter. Well, the feminists said, no, this is actually a public matter. This is actually a matter for society and social discourse to get in and to change. Therefore, the personal is political and the patriarchy is oppressive. Therefore, not only is your personal life a public matter, the man is your enemy. That's essentially what this personal is political meant in the short term. Now, ideas have short-term consequences and long-term impacts. Now, the long-term impact of that personal is political is, again, this mixing of realms, the policy realm and the personal realm, and this emphasis on that character, personal character or personal habits that are not substantive in the sense that they would suggest how you govern a country, but they're merely personal quirks or personal things that have no impact on other areas of your life. These have actually become political issues. So if the personal is political begins by saying the realm of society is a political realm and therefore must be subject to authority, It then ends by saying things within that realm that don't seem significant are actually significant because the personal is political. So let's actually put this into context of the day. So JD Vance, for example, has been criticized for talking a lot about childless women and childbirth, things like that. And by the way, look, those of you that know me and that know my content, I have criticisms of JD Vance from a constitutionalist perspective. My criticisms are based on his ideology. As far as his personhood goes or his character goes, I have no interest in getting involved in that fight because that's not a fight that's particularly important to me. I don't care what JD Vance does in his personal life necessarily. I care what his ascendancy to the vice presidency represents for our republic. But even within my criticisms of him, I would never have a guess to call him weird. But some of his personal quirks, like his interest in sort of like familial structure and things like that, have got him called weird. So if the personal is political, then your personal quirks can be used against you in political context. This weird admixture of these two contexts, which should be separate and must be separate, because if the personal realm gets into the political realm, you can't really have a personal realm. You have a sort of a kind of servility induced by authority always watching you and authority always hanging over you. This is one of the reasons why people will criticize, for example, what happened during the 60s. The 60s has this kind of grand place in American history, and people will say, well, the civil rights movement was one of the best things to happen, and for many cases it was. But then some folks will say, well, some of the measures undertaken during the civil rights era didn't actually help race relations in America. They didn't actually help heal the wounds that had been beset by the violent extremists and the racists that had come before, and therefore we should reevaluate the legacy of that era. Well, that person is then called evil or called nasty simply for saying, hey, there are things that we left out, or there are things even that we did that weren't necessarily helpful to advancing, this idea of equality or this idea of acceptance or benevolence. And so this is the same kind of thing going on here. This mixing of personal and political realms doesn't always reach the result you actually wanted to reach. In some cases, it actually allows tyrants and central managers to have more control over your life and therefore erode your personal life, and it becomes entirely a matter of public spectacle, which is no way to live life in general. So that's another thing that weird is a part of. Weird is downstream of this personalist political idea that has beset the consciousness of so many Americans for such a long time. But there's also another thing that weird is downstream of. Weird, and this is perhaps one of the biggest points I'm going to make here, is downstream of the current standards that have been set for our political conversation in America. So I want you to think about the days of the great William F. Buckley or Christopher Hitchens or Gloria Vidal, and whatever you think about these individuals on a personal level is absolutely relevant to me. I want you to just think of what they represented on a cultural level in the abstract. The days where during the RNC in the 60s you could see public intellectuals like Buckley and Vidal going back and forth against each other, citing classical references and using philosophical concepts, things that were probably only known to elite people, being subjected before the sight of the masses, educating them, enlightening them, edifying them, giving them a deeper understanding of politics. Think of those days. Then think of the days we live in right now. And I actually did a video about this, about how over the past 60, 70 years, the quality of media in America has substantially deteriorated. In fact, I'll actually put that video up here on the screen if you guys want to go watch it. I encourage you. Well, we went from Buckley and Hitchens in these brilliant debates on all kind of matters that were analyzed in uncommon ways to 60-second talking heads fighting on cable news, screaming, or people going on, getting invited on shows simply for saying the most outrageous thing, because the most outrageous thing drives clicks, whereas substance and actually edification are no longer the standards of our day. So the standards that our current political debate atmosphere are based on are actually standards that are indicative of mediocre thinking on issues of policy and values. This mediocrity empowers bad actors to weaponize sensation, weaponize emotion, weaponize how we feel for political gain, a tactic commonly undertaken by progressives. Because as I said in my last video, progressives are all about, in many cases, realizing their political projects through imagination. And imagination is triggered in some cases by sensation. And one of the places of sensation that is deep within the human heart that inspires imagination is emotion. Therefore, progressives tend to use emotion, whether it be saying we have the first black president and using that simple symbolic fact to justify Barack Obama's tenure in office, or saying we have the first Indian president to justify a potential Kamala presidency, or saying that George Floyd, right, because something bad happened to him, he is somehow a martyr and an example we have to deify, not able to separate, the idea that something bad happened to somebody, but we're not going to worship everything they did in life. We're going to actually have some context, and we're going to keep it in perspective. No. We have to worship these people. Things like that. That is the use of sensation for political gain. And it's dangerous because it betrays reason. And a politics that is besmirched of reason is not a politics that can be understood by everybody. It's a politics that can only be understood by the small elite who hold the terms being emotionally triggered in common. It's a kind of politics of exclusion, actually. It's quite funny. It's not funny, but it actually is quite funny. It's a politics of exclusion where one people has a common dictionary they share, and the rest of us have this dictionary, and they speak this language that we don't understand. Some of you are probably thinking right now, oh, Chris, you're talking about what George Carlin said. It's a big club, and you're not in it. Well, not exactly, actually, because I'm not talking about some shadowy elite. I'm talking about a group of people that may be your neighbors that have a different understanding of words than you do, and they use that in a different way than you would. Now, what do you do in a civil society, in a free society? This is a problem that arises. It's the problem of distinction. And how do we handle that? Well, we handle that by talking things out. Even if we have different dictionaries, we talk things out. So it's normally not a problem. But when people are politically incentivized to hold that differentiation and to have their own private understanding, as Wittgenstein would say, then talking things out won't be the easiest thing. And that breeds all kinds of bad habits that are destructive to civil society. So just keep that in mind. I went off on a tangent, my apologies. But think about the victory of the right. The victories the right has had over the past 80, 90, 100 years. Think about people in the 20s, the old right, like Henry Cabot Lodge, like H.L. Mencken, like Senator Robert Taft. These people that many of you have probably heard of, some of you have not, who defended America's national sovereignty when the progressives sought to sell it out to internationalist interests. These people who had defended the separation between the private and the public realm. These people that defended the thrift and the self-reliance that is so endemic to the American spirit. Think about the terms they fought on, and think about the terms that we fight on. A true conservative victory will only occur if we understand the reality that is set before us right now, and we refuse to engage in discourse on mediocre terms. We must imitate the intellectual habits of the founding generation and habituate them until they become the norm and displace the current mediocre norms that populate our discourse, saying things because it's outrageous, saying things to get likes, sticking to this 60-second soundbite culture to keep people's attention spans, captured for a short moment, so they burn out like a moth to a flame. This kind of stuff. These mediocre habits need to be displaced if we're going to have a healthy culture. So in short, we must assert several principles to fix the problem we have right now. We must assert reason. We must assert foreknowledge of key issues. In other words, don't just fill the issues. Don't just be familiar with the issues. Actually use your mind and study the issues that confront our country so that when you get in conversations, you can both edify your neighbor and edify yourself at the same time. That's what debate is. Debate is the tension, as Plato said, between knowledge and opinion. So we have to assert that. We have to assert philosophical education, charitability. Your opponents that are your ideological opponents are not always your moral opponents. Sometimes they're just confused. We have to assert a proper understanding of the limits of political power as well, because so many people have gone crazy in their imaginations with how they can use political power to silence their enemies on both the left and the right. The alternative is to obsess over skin color, sexuality, marginalized class, eye color, gender identity, to obsess over these things, to obsess over a obscure think tank project that ends in the number 25, all these different things that don't really mean anything, but have been given moral valence by those who seek to manage society in a way that is grossly un-American and that is grossly antisocial. That is the alternative to pursuing an agenda of reason, of charitability, of foreknowledge of issues, and of intelligence, and of philosophical understanding. So we have choices, my friends. We can keep leaning in to this mediocre notion of weird. And we can keep saying to the left, oh, no, we're not weird. You're weird. And we can keep being like cartoon characters. That kind of reminds me. What's that one? Well, it reminds me of like the Willie E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. You guys remember that one? Where the coyote is like literally chasing the Roadrunner, and the Roadrunner's like meep meep, and they're like going around. Well, what I'm trying to say is, when you say, oh, I'm not weird, you're weird, what you're actually saying is, I'm going to go around in the circle with you, like Willie E. Coyote and the Roadrunner, and we're going to get nowhere except where you want me to get. No, damn that. I'm not going to do all that, okay? I'm not going to do all that. So we can keep going around in these circles and having these useless debates, or we can reject the premises upon which these terms, which these debates, weird or whatever, are founded on, and say, no. I don't care if you think I'm weird. I'm going to tell you what needs to be said, and the truth will speak louder than what you're trying to do right now in our conversation. That is the only solution. That is the only intelligible solution for our current crisis. The question is, my friend, will you join me in asserting this solution and in using this solution in the way you talk about politics and about these issues today? Or will you not? The choice is yours, but I would urge you, in love and goodwill and charity, to please consider escaping from the current mediocre mindset that many of us have, myself included, these days. Do not allow your passions to rule you. Let your mind set forth a positive agenda about the world that you can use to hopefully lay the groundwork for the restoration of our republic. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get this message out there. Study history, my friends. Study philosophy. Remain morally convicted. If you want to support me, I'm on Patreon, I'm on PayPal, I'm on Buy Me a Coffee. I have merchandise. You can guys go down there, the comment section down below. My friends, please stay pensive. God bless you. Bye-bye.